Story begins with a lost astronaut trying to communicate with the control tower. He states that he should have landed in New Mexico, and it's obvious that this didn't happen, as the landscape is totally different, plus there are 3 moons in the sky. When something starts to roar threateningly, the astronaut pleads for someone to respond and attempts to flee the danger by running. He stumbles, and as he gets up, he lets out a scream of terror when he comes face to face with a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Then we meet Dr. Rick Marshall, a specialist in quantum paleontology who is being interviewed by Matt Lauer. His solution to the fuel crisis is a mix of time travel and visits to parallel universes. Matt is shocked to learn that this nonsense has already consumed $50 million of public funds. Besides being rude, Rick doesn't answer the questions properly and limits himself to shamelessly promoting his latest book. When Matt mentions critics of the research, starting with the esteemed physicist Stephen Hawking, Rick loses his composure. He stands up in anger as if he's leaving, then runs back to attack the host and has to be restrained by the crew. 3 years later, Rick is presenting his grand invention, the tachyon amplifier. Using the high speed of these particles, the machine can transport the passenger to a parallel reality where past, present, and future mix. Only when the speech ends do we discover he is speaking to children. Rick has been working as a science teacher since his career imploded during that interview. Today, a woman named Holly Cantrell comes to talk to him after class, introducing herself as a big fan of his work and stating that a tachyon amplifier needs to be built as soon as possible. Rick rejects the idea, saying that those theories ruined his life. But then she shows him a rock that is over 200 million years old. Inexplicably, the stone is marked with the unmistakable silhouette of a modern-day lighter. Holly says she found it in the same place where she collected crystals that emit tachyon energy. The next day, she returns to apologize for her intrusion and finds the professor in a deplorable state. However, she soon discovers that this is all a result of a sleepless night, as Rick has finally finished building the amplifier. He admits the achievement but confesses that he hasn't had the courage to test it yet. Much more businesslike than her idol, Holly decides that they will test it the same day. But not there, in the midst of the mess and pizza leftovers. She takes Rick to the place where she found those objects, the Cave of Mysteries, an attraction in an old amusement park. The downside is that the owner, Will, is still around. In addition to charging for visits, he desperately tries to sell some of his horrendous products. It's all in pursuit of his dream, which is to build a tasteless casino. Leaving a guy named Ernie to tend the shop, Will takes the 2 customers on a tour inside the cave. Firm in their scientific purposes, they do their best to endure Will's antics as a tour guide. The first mystery presented is the legend of the Lizard Man, who supposedly attacks his victims since the colonization of the Americas. It doesn't take long for the creature to appear, in the form of a ridiculous puppet that breaks within 2 seconds. Will gets irritated with the failure and starts complaining about the apathy of the customers, but Rick isn't even listening. His devices have picked up a massive amount of tachyons, inspiring him to start the tests. The whole cave begins to shake, and water gushes with much more force, dragging the boat toward a waterfall that Will insists wasn't there before. The 3 plunge from the top toward a blue light and lose consciousness. Sometime later, Rick wakes up with his face in the sand, and Will is regaining consciousness. Holly has been up for a while and is already exploring the surroundings, amazed by what she sees. Right in front of her is a Cessna plane crashed on top of a Viking ship. The first thing Rick does is record a video documenting his victory, stating that Matt Lauer was wrong. Poor Will tries to understand what happened while listening to him and gets nervous when Rick mentions a concerning detail. The amplifier seems to have vanished, and it is the only way back home. Hearing the sound of growls and footsteps, the 3 crouch down to observe what Holly identifies as a group of primates. Seeing that one of them is about to attack the other, she decides to intervene and provokes a curious encounter. Will seizes the opportunity and immediately pulls out a lighter, intending to dominate this species through advanced technology. However, he ends up burning his finger and drops the lighter, which is quickly stolen by one of the primates. The shyer one is still hiding behind a rock, and Holly attempts to communicate with him, discovering that his name is Shaka. Rick notices that he has an injured ankle and decides to help him, but he doesn't have much tact. Shaka lunges at him and then flees, with the 3 chasing after him. They all end up falling into a hole and find themselves in a real cave this time. Upset by the rejection, Rick asks Holly to talk to the primate and intercede on his behalf. Not knowing how to express a middle ground, she says that Rick is the respectable leader of the tribe, and Shaka clings to his leg, offering his loyalty. Then, they are attacked by vines that seem to have a life of their own, grabbing each one by the waist. Hanging from a branch, They panic when they look down and see that the ground is covered with the remains of previous victims. The hungry growling completes the explanation, and Rick says that this place can only be a dining hall for some beast. Holding hands, they struggle to gain momentum and try to escape. The idea might have worked if the dinosaur hadn't arrived right in the middle of their aerial ballet. Luckily, it snaps up the vines, inadvertently freeing all four. Holly decides to take a photo of the Tyrannosaurus and asks Will to pose next to it for size reference. This significantly delays their escape, and Shaka doesn't wait for anyone. To the dismay of his new master, he crosses a bridge and then tries to destroy it, clearly thinking of leaving the clumsy group behind. Still, they all manage to make it in time and safely cross. The dinosaur stops at the edge, and Rick explains to the others that he is too stupid to cross the bridge, but in reality, he is just gaining momentum before leaping over to reach them. The chase continues until they reach a hole in the side of the mountain. Although it doesn't reach them, the beast spits liters of saliva all over them before moving on. Not the least bit shaken, Holly nicknames the dinosaur Grumpy. Now that the danger has passed, she returns to her exploratory spirit and declares that they must be the first humans to visit this world. However, a phonograph playing English songs and two uniformed skeletons prove that this is not true. Discovering that the hole is the entrance to a cave, the trio decides to spend the night there. Rick starts to poke fun at Shaka, suspecting that the episode with the vine might have been a punishment for something he did. Holly once again has to translate. Shaka explains that he is a prince full of love and his only sin was relieving himself in the village well. Rick says that's enough to get him kicked out of their cave. However, the primate has already won over the other two, and Will even says that he is cute. Rick and Will also disagree about defense strategies, as Will wants to protect the shelter from the Tyrannosaurus, and Rick insists that the creature is too stupid to remember where the cave is. When he says that its brain is the size of a walnut, violent thuds begin to shake the cave and then stop abruptly. The three arm themselves as best they can to approach the entrance and find a sort of gift. Removing the wrapping leaves, Rick is dumbfounded to see what a walnut looks like in this world. The next day, Will brings fruits for everyone, and Rick questions whether it's safe to eat them. Shaka indicates that it is and offers one to his master, but when the fruit breaks open, dozens of insects come out of it. Rick is outraged but sees that it was not meant to be malicious, as Shaka eats the insects without issue. The conversation is interrupted by a bright light coming from outside. Through the binoculars, Holly sees what appears to be a beam of energy. Then Rick is struck by a sudden pain in his head and has visions of a creature asking for help. Coming out of the trance, he decides to search for this being that communicated with him, heading toward the source of the beam. Holly admires the uniqueness of the architecture, and even Will is impressed, but Shaka seems very distressed.